Those include this squad car footage that shows the moment officers drive past Jake Patterson. You can see his car right there. He even pulls over. 3 different squad cars passed Patterson at the time. Officers had no idea that Jayme was inside the trunk of that car, and the driver had just murdered 2 people in Barron County. Fast forward 88 days, Jayme Closs escapes from Jake inside a cabin in Douglas County and gets help. Jake is then taken into custody.
Authorities say the teen hid in a locked bathroom with her mother last October as Jake Patterson stormed their home, first allegedly killing Jayme's father, then her mother, before holding her captive for 88 days in a remote house.
Have you ever thought about how the line between a peaceful night and a living nightmare can be just a matter of hours? At 10 p.m., a mother is on the phone chatting with her sister. Everything perfectly normal. But by 1 a.m., 911 receives a call, no voices on the line, just chaos, followed by dead silence.
I have many deputies headed that way. I'm going to keep you on the line.
Okay.
And she said, I am Jayme Closs.
Yes. She said, you killed my parents. I want to go home. Help me.
When police break down the door, they find 2 people deceased, but their 13-year-old daughter, Jayme Closs, has vanished without a trace. No DNA, no fingerprints, not a single sound. What actually happened in those 4 short minutes? And this is the part that haunts me. The person behind it all didn't even know them. Everything I am about to share with you has been pieced together from investigative files, original 911 audio recordings, and courtroom testimony. Let's get started. What struck me here was the randomness. You think you're safe in your own home, but sometimes a random glance changes everything. Let's set the scene. Barron, Wisconsin is one of those small, tight-knit Midwestern towns where everybody knows everybody. It's the kind of place where you don't even think twice about locking your doors at night. Jim and Denise Closs were the very definition of ordinary, hardworking people. They both worked at the local turkey plant for nearly 3 decades, building a quiet, predictable life. And right at the center of their entire universe was their 13-year-old daughter, Jayme. She was their only child, a sweet girl who loved dancing, hanging out with friends, and just being a normal teenager. They did everything to protect her and make her happy. The thing is, when you trace back the steps of that fateful Sunday night, October 14th, everything was perfectly normal. At 10 p.m., Denise was on the phone chatting with her sister. It was just a regular, everyday conversation. No stress, no sense of danger. Nothing out of place. Looking back, that simple phone call acts as a heavy anchor. It was the very last moment of peace before their reality was completely upended just a few hours later. Meanwhile, hiding completely off the radar, there was a ghost. When you dig into the background of the person who orchestrated this, you don't find a long, documented criminal record. You don't find a loud, obvious threat making a scene in town. What I found was a high school yearbook photo of a kid sitting way in the back of a classroom, entirely by himself. He was literally voted the quietest student by his graduating class. He was a ghost that nobody paid attention to, slipping right through the cracks of a quiet community. And this is important when you think about people who are capable of doing something so dark. Do you ever suspect the person who completely blends into the background? Or do you instinctively look for the loud, obvious threats? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because that invisible profile is exactly what makes this so chilling. Because of that absolute randomness, and because the Closs family had 0 known enemies, the fear that gripped the town the next morning was suffocating. The person responsible had vanished into the night, taking Jayme with him. There was no clear motive, no suspect, just an empty, broken home. At this point, the sheer weight of the unknown was paralyzing for the family. You can hear the raw terror in the words of Jayme's aunt when she spoke to Fox 9 about those first dark hours.
I remember the night after it happened, and we were at home, and we had to go to bed. I have never in my life been so scared. I was scared to death for my siblings. I was scared to death for my kids. I was scared to death for everybody because we didn't know. For 88 days, we had to listen to people speculate, people talk about your family, and we didn't know. We didn't know who was involved, if we were in danger.
Which tells us just how terrifying it truly is when an invisible ghost suddenly steps into your real life. When investigators finally caught up with the suspect, he tried to play the whole thing off as a spur-of-the-moment decision. He actually sat in the interrogation room, and insisted he didn't really plan it out. But when I started digging into the evidence, that narrative completely fell apart. Just look at the terrifying lengths he went to before he even pulled into the Closs family's driveway. He completely shaved his head and his face so he wouldn't leave a single stray hair behind at the scene. He drove to a different town to steal a license plate from a random vehicle, swapping it onto the back of his own car and taking his front plate off entirely. He even went into the trunk of his car, disabled the interior dome light, and physically removed the emergency escape latch from the inside. So, he claims it was impulsive. But look at the prep work. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. This was a cold, heavily calculated mission. And that level of calculation shows in exactly how fast everything happened. From the moment Denise's chaotic 911 call connected to the moment deputies arrived at the house, only about 4 minutes had passed. Just 4 minutes. In that incredibly narrow window, he forced his way inside, eliminated the adults, and zeroed in on his target. But tucked inside those 4 horrifying minutes is also a story of a mother's ultimate, heartbreaking sacrifice. When the intruder kicked in the bathroom door, he found Jayme Closs sitting in the bathtub, wrapping her entire body around Jayme in a desperate, protective bear hug. She literally used herself as a human shield. She didn't hesitate to put herself on the line, doing absolutely everything she could to protect her little girl until the very last second. What happened next is a detail that is just incredibly hard to swallow. He gets back into his older model maroon car with Jayme locked in the dark trunk, and he drives away. At the exact same time, first responders are speeding toward the Closs home, lights flashing, and sirens wailing, and they cross paths. He actually pulls over to the shoulder of the dark road, yielding to the police cruisers, acting just like any other normal law-abiding citizen getting out of the way of an emergency. You can hear the crushing realization hit the officers later when they review the dash cam footage from that night.
Site.
We cleared the house.
Okay.
Only 2 we found.
Okay.
Whoever
was here is gone.
I'm assuming. Do you want to run and download and try to see if you can pull any plates of cars going that way?
That maroon car that yielded?
Yeah, you're right.
I had it at 54.
They were literally just feet away from stopping this nightmare. If you were in that police car, passing a random vehicle in the opposite direction on a dark road, would you have thought twice? Let me know what you think below. Because of that one perfectly executed ordinary act of pulling over, he slipped right through their fingers. And from there, the trail went absolutely cold. The problem is, when investigators started combing through the house, they hit a massive brick wall. You would think a crime this sudden and chaotic would leave behind a mountain of physical clues. But the scene was frustratingly clean. There were no obvious fingerprints, no stray hairs left behind, no clear tire tracks out in the driveway. The only piece of biological evidence they managed to pull was a partial DNA sequence from an expended shell casing, which means, unless they already had a prime suspect in custody to compare it against, that tiny piece of DNA was basically useless. The trail was completely cold from day one. And this is where things take a really dark turn. Because of that absolute lack of official answers, the internet decided to fill in the blanks when a high-profile case stalls out. The online rumor mill always explodes. Web sleuths and armchair detectives started dissecting the family's life. And before long, people were actually blaming Jayme. They started spinning up these incredibly toxic conspiracy theories, insisting she must have had a secret older boyfriend. They claimed she somehow orchestrated the whole tragedy just so she could run away with him. It's heartbreaking when you think about it. Her family is already living through their worst nightmare, and at the same time, they have to watch strangers on social media point fingers at a 13-year-old victim. At this point, law enforcement is desperate for any solid lead, and then this guy shows up. About 2 weeks into the investigation, security cameras set up around the empty Closs home catch someone breaking in. Police rush to the scene and arrest a man named Kyle Jankianis. They catch him red-handed inside the house with items of Jayme's clothing stuffed into his pockets. On paper, it looks like they finally caught their guy, but what I found was that this man had absolutely zero connection to the original crime. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just a highly delusional individual who decided to break in and insert himself into a national tragedy. Instead of closing the case, this became a massive red herring that drained crucial time, resources, and police manpower. You can hear exactly what the frustrated investigators were dealing with during his bizarre interrogation.
In reality, it was her underwear or something like that. Any child comes up missing, it pisses me off. And it makes me want to go fucking up.
So, they had to waste precious hours interviewing a guy who was just chasing his own delusions, while the real perpetrator was still out there completely undetected. Meanwhile, the clock kept ticking. And with every passing day, the realistic odds of finding Jayme alive were slipping further and further away. What would you do if you were an investigator watching the internet turn on the victim while you had absolutely zero leads? Let me know your thoughts down below. While the police were chasing ghosts and internet rumors, the real nightmare was unfolding about 65 miles north, inside an isolated, snow-covered cabin in Gordon, Wisconsin. What happened inside that cabin is a dark study in psychological manipulation. There was a terrifying contrast in how her captor operated day to day. On one hand, he would force Jayme to crawl into a tiny, cramped space under his bed. He would barricade her in with heavy plastic storage totes and barbell weights, leaving her trapped there in the dark for up to 12 hours at a time. No food, no water, no bathroom breaks. But then, when he let her out, he would just flip a switch. He would act like absolutely nothing was wrong, turning on the TV or trying to play board games, pretending as if they were just two people living a normal life together. Before we dive deeper into the psychology of how Jayme actually survived this, if you are finding this investigation insightful and want to follow more deep dive true crime breakdowns like this, 1. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps us continue this journey with you. Now, here is the detail that really messes with your head. Most of the time, the doors to the cabin weren't even locked. He didn't use physical chains or heavy padlocks to keep her inside. He didn't have to. He used something much stronger. Pure, paralyzing fear. He knew that the sheer trauma of what she witnessed on the night she was taken was enough to keep her completely compliant. He essentially weaponized her own terror, making her believe that if she stepped out of line, the consequences would be fatal. And when his father or friends would casually stop by the cabin to visit, he would force Jayme under the bed and turn the radio up incredibly loud to drown out any possible noise she might make. She would lay there, absolutely frozen, just inches away from people who could have saved her, while he carried on normal conversations right above her. Imagine lying in the dark, hearing people right outside your hiding spot, but being completely paralyzed by the threat of what he might do if you made a sound. Do you think you would have risked screaming? Or would that kind of fear have kept you silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments because it's a terrifying position to be in. To endure this kind of extreme mental warfare for 88 days, Jayme's brain had to do something incredible. When she was eventually rescued, witnesses described her as being in a state of mellow shock. She wasn't hysterical, and she wasn't crying uncontrollably. She was quiet, flat, and entirely calm. Some people might misunderstand that as shutting down, or giving up. But from a psychological perspective, that is exactly what survival looks like. When a human being is pushed entirely past their breaking point, the brain actively freezes out overwhelming emotions, just to keep the body functioning. That mellow shock wasn't defeat. It was a biological shield. She was conserving every single ounce of her energy, playing his game, and quietly waiting for the exact right moment to take her life back. On January 10th, 2019, exactly 88 days into this unimaginable nightmare, a window of opportunity finally cracked open. Patterson told Jayme he was leaving the house for a few hours. Like always, he forced her into the cramped space beneath his bed and barricaded her in with heavy plastic storage bins and weights. But this time, something shifted. The moment she heard his car pull away, Jayme made a decision that would change everything. She pushed against those heavy bins, crawled out from under that bed, and decided she was taking her life back. She didn't have time to gather supplies or plan a route. She just grabbed a thin sweatshirt, slipped her feet into a pair of Patterson's oversized sneakers, putting the left shoe on the right foot in her frantic rush, and bolted out the door into the freezing, snow-covered Wisconsin wilderness. She had only made it about 100 yards down the isolated dirt road when she saw a woman walking her dog. Out of all the people she could have crossed paths with in the middle of nowhere, she ran into Jean Nutter. And this is important. Jean wasn't just a random neighbor. She happened to be a retired trauma counselor. When Jayme ran up to her, freezing and terrified, saying, "I am Jayme Closs, please help me," Jean didn't panic. She didn't press the traumatized teenager for details or completely break down. Her professional instincts kicked right in. Jean knew that her own cabin was physically bordering Patterson's property, which meant it was entirely too close to the danger zone. So, instead of running to her own home, Jan quickly guided Jayme further down the road to another neighbor's house, putting as much physical distance as possible between them and the captor.
She was asking me for help, saying she was lost, she didn't know where she was. I knew she needed help, and I knew I needed to get her to a safe place, and that's just what I did.
What are the odds of a victim running into a highly trained trauma expert on an empty, freezing road in the middle of the woods? Do you think that was just pure luck, or did fate step in? Let me know what you think down in the comments. What happened next was an incredibly tense standoff. Jan and Jayme reached the home of Peter and Kristen Kacinskas, who immediately recognized the missing girl and dialed 911.
Door opens and Jeannie says, "This is Jayme Closs, and call 911. Tired, you know, looked like she lost probably 15 to 20 pounds from like the original photos that we had seen. She doesn't look like she was able to like take a bath or wash her hair, clothes, or anything like that." So,
was she scared? Was she emotional?
She wasn't emotional at all. She was pretty kind of, I don't know if it was mellow shock, you know, just kind of calm.
But the nightmare wasn't over just because they made that call. The 911 audio from that afternoon is absolutely suffocating to listen to.
Hey, 911.
Hi. I have a young lady at my house right now, and she says her name is Jayme Closs.
Okay, what's your address?
1-4. It's in Gordon, Wisconsin.
Okay, have you seen her photo, ma'am?
Yes, it is her. I 100% think it is her.
Are you okay?
100%.
Does it look like she's gonna run?
No, she's sitting down. She's relaxing.
What's your name, ma'am?
Kristen Kacinskas.
Okay, did she show up walking?
Yeah, a neighbor just walked up with her to our house and asked us to call 911.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Are you cold? Do you need a blanket or anything? Do you need anything to drink or water or anything?
Kristen, is the neighbor that walked her up, is she still there?
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, can I just get your name?
Jeannie Nutter, N-U-T-T-E-R.
Okay, and do you have a cabin address?
The dispatcher immediately ordered a total lockdown. They were instructed to lock every single door, step away from all the windows, and physically lock their dogs in a separate room. The police were rushing to the scene, and they didn't want barking dogs to create chaos or trigger a tragic accident. When armed deputies stormed the property, inside the house, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Peter Kacinskas actually retrieved his hunting shotgun and stood guard at the front door, fully prepared to defend the 13-year-old girl if Patterson came looking for her. At this point, I started questioning how agonizing those 30 minutes must have felt. Every passing headlight, every snap of a branch outside, every gust of winter wind against the glass could have been the killer coming back. They sat there in that locked house, counting every single second, waiting for the flashing red and blue lights to finally pierce through the darkness. For Jayme, those 30 minutes of waiting for the police must have felt almost as terrifying as the 88 days she spent in captivity. But her incredible courage had already set the wheels in motion. Help was finally on the way. So, after Jayme's miraculous escape and Patterson's arrest, the investigation immediately shifted toward understanding the mind of the captor. And what investigators found was a textbook case of extreme criminal narcissism. When police first interrogated Jake Patterson, he desperately tried to control the narrative. He claimed he wasn't a monster, insisting that he didn't think like a serial killer and that the whole thing was mostly just a terrible impulse. He actually tried to frame himself as a somewhat normal guy who just made a horrific spur-of-the-moment mistake. But the thing is, his own handwritten words completely destroyed that facade. While sitting in his jail cell awaiting trial, Patterson started writing letters. In one highly disturbing letter that was later read aloud in court, he confessed the absolute truth. He admitted that he had been having dark, obsessive fantasies for a long time. Fantasies about keeping someone captive and completely controlling their everyday life, even more chilling. He revealed that before he zeroed in on Jayme, he had actually planned on targeting multiple people and destroying multiple families. When I read the transcript of that specific letter, the terrifying reality of what this community was actually dealing with really hit me. He wasn't just a quiet, misguided kid who snapped one day, he was a ticking time bomb. If you look at the psychological profile here, his true motive becomes glaringly obvious. This was entirely about absolute power and manipulation. He targeted a 13-year-old girl because she was vulnerable, and he wanted to play God in his own isolated world. And this is where his narcissism really steps into the spotlight. You would think someone facing life in prison for these actions would just keep their head down and stay quiet. But Patterson couldn't handle not being the center of attention. From his cell, he actively reached out to a local journalist. He wanted to shape public opinion and make sure people heard his version of events. In that letter, he had the sheer audacity to complain that the police were twisting his words and trying to cover up their mistakes. He orchestrates an unthinkable tragedy and then sits in a jail cell playing the victim, blaming law enforcement for making him look bad. If you were a detective working tirelessly on this case, how would you even react to a suspect who tries to spin the narrative like that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because that level of arrogance is just staggering. Meanwhile, the devastating ripple effects of his actions were tearing through his own family. Patterson's father, who claimed he had visited the cabin multiple times without ever realizing Jayme was hidden, just feet away. tried to reach out. He attempted to pass a handwritten note of apology to the Closs family during a court appearance, but Jayme's aunt, who had bravely stepped up as her legal guardian, drew an immediate and permanent line in the sand. She firmly rejected the letter. She made it crystal clear to the public that she had absolutely nothing to say to that family and never planned to communicate with them in the future. Her only priority was shielding Jayme from any more noise or trauma. Because of that fierce, unwavering protection, Jayme was given the space she needed to breathe, to heal, and to prepare for the final chapter of this nightmare. From there, the stage was set for the sentencing, and the man who thought he could control her was about to find out exactly how badly he had failed. When the day of sentencing finally arrived in May 2019, the courtroom was packed with family, friends, and community members. Everyone was waiting for that final hammer of justice to fall. Jayme chose not to attend in person. She didn't need to give him the satisfaction of looking at her ever again. But make no mistake, her voice echoed through that room louder than anyone else's. Her attorney stood up and read a statement on her behalf, and the words she wrote were absolutely devastating to the man who tried to break her. This is the part I couldn't get past. She was just 13, but she took back her power. Through her attorney, she told the court, "He thought that he could own me, but he was wrong. I was smarter. I watched his routine, and I took back my freedom. I will always have my freedom, and he will not." Just let that sink in for a second. He tried to strip away her identity, silence her, and turn her into a helpless victim. But instead of breaking, she observed. She calculated, and she ultimately became the architect of his total downfall. After hearing her powerful statement, the judge looked directly at Patterson, called him the very embodiment of evil, and handed down the maximum penalty. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 40 years. He is never ever walking out of a cell. So, as we close the files on this investigation, what is the real takeaway here? Beyond the tragedy, a massive lesson emerges about patience, resilience, and the absolute refusal to give up hope. For 88 grueling days, the small town of Barron simply refused to let Jayme become a forgotten statistic. They organized massive grid searches, with over 2,000 everyday volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through freezing woods, rivers, and cornfields. They kept her face illuminated on billboards across the state, they tied ribbons around every tree in town, and they held constant vigils. They proved that when a community stands entirely unified, they create a net of awareness that eventually brings the truth into the light. But the ultimate hero of this story is without a doubt Jayme herself. She survived the darkest circumstances, patiently waited for her one narrow window of opportunity, and ran toward the light. I really want to hear from you what goes through your mind when you think about the incredible mental fortitude it took for a 13-year-old girl to outsmart her captor and save her own life. Please share your thoughts down in the comments, because her sheer bravery is something we should all talk about and honor. The legal case is now officially closed, and the person responsible is locked away forever. But as I wrap up this journey, there is still a very heavy, lingering shadow hanging over everything. The guy who did this wasn't a known villain with a massive criminal record. He didn't stand out in a crowd. He was the quietest student in the back of the classroom, the guy nobody noticed, blending perfectly into the background of everyday ordinary life. Which leaves us with one deeply unsettling question to think about tonight. If the most dangerous threats aren't the loud, obvious ones, but rather the invisible ghosts who walk quietly past us every single day, how are we supposed to recognize the next invisible monster before it's too late?